Yay!
Hey. Ha-
So I've been looking forward to talking to you with you all day.
really? Awesome. Me
Yes,
too.
I have so many questions. So I should have done a lot more research on, like, gone and watched all your videos, but I have so many questions. So what area do you live in? You don't have to tell me specifically, but
North Georgia.
okay, North Georgia. Okay. One of my husband and I's, one of our goals to go to is Savannah and Atlanta. I've never been to either one.
Savannah, I haven't been there. So I only moved here a year ago from Minnesota. That's where I came from. I haven't been to Savannah yet, but everyone loves it. Atlanta is a nightmare. Just like there's like an 18-lane highway that is the most terrifying thing I've driven on so far.
I'm actually going to Minnesota tomorrow.
Good,
I'm going to
good on ya.
Minneapolis, St. Paul, Blaine area. My daughter's boyfriend plays hockey, and their team made the playoffs, and it's in Minnesota. So yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, just spent the past 14 years there. That's not where I'm from originally, but it's
Okay.
there's a lot of reasons I left, and almost all
Okay.
of
So
them are
yeah,
political.
not all of them were. Or
Not all of them, but most of them were. Yeah.
so I
There's
don't even
one
know.
thing,
Go ahead.
huh? Well, there's just like one thing I can't stand outside of the politics. There's one thing I can't stand. I grew up in the Midwest, and Minnesota nice is just passive aggression I couldn't deal with anymore. So that was like the big one where I'm just like, no, I can't do it.
So so I don't even know. Is Georgia more red or blue, or I mean, is your governor a Republican or
It's very similar to a lot of other Midwest states where the major city is blue, but the rural areas are red. Where
okay?
I'm at is heavy red. I'm on the border, like right at Tennessee, and Tennessee is like I don't think it can get any more red. So
Okay. Okay. So how old are your kids?
11 and 6. Yes.
Okay. 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 So what is your like? I don't know what generation you grew up in. I honestly have no idea how old you are. You look like you could be 30. You could look like you could be 40. I have absolutely no idea. 35.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So growing up, were you into politics or just government at all, or has it just been like recently?
Oh, girl, my backstory is crazy. So
We got
I grew
time.
up.
We got time.
Yeah, I grew up in a small mountain town and in Colorado. Well, I didn't grow up there, but that's where I ended up. And my mom ultimately ended up working at a newspaper, Colorado's oldest newspaper, and that was in I don't know the early '90s. And I ended up working there, starting at like 12 years old, shipping out newspapers. And then I converted the traditional cut and paste newspaper to digital. That I did at 14. And then I started writing stories. So the small town it was in was a casino town. It was one of three towns in Colorado that had legal gaming, and there was a lot of stipulations around that. Well, as I started writing things, I started covering city council meetings, and I caught on to something kind of goofy one day. As part of gaming in Colorado, a certain percentage of gaming revenue went to historic preservation funds, and those were supposed to keep the town preserved. Right? It was where the gold rush started, and the buildings needed to be preserved. Well, I started to notice the city council started approving projects at home addresses. And then I started digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And what that turned into was an 8-year long battle between us and the crooked politicians where they had funneled a couple $100,000 just to personal expenses and stuff. And so I've been dealing with crooked politicians and politics since about 16 years old in a public arena. And yeah, it ended poorly for us. The mayor bought the newspaper for $10 and fired us all on the spot.
No.
Yep.
So where does your mom live now?
She passed away about 5 years ago, and
Oh, I'm sorry.
that whole thing is just she was a narcissist abuser. So I was actually
No.
being used while at the newspaper by her on top of just all the other stuff. So complex journey.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So one of the things that really intrigued me about you is I'm assuming because I have friends who are in the LGBTQ community and people. I just did a video about this today, and people that are minorities that got like I have a friend who got more hate for coming out conservative than they did when they came out as a gay man, and he right away though was very sure of who he was and had enough confidence where he's like, I don't need to be part of this community then. If that's how you're gonna accept me or not accept me is because where I stand politically, then I don't believe in this community. So, but there's a lot of people I think that probably do lean right, but are afraid to voice their opinions or their voice because they're afraid they're going to get attacked in their own community, whether that's the gay, lesbian, trans, or whether it's minorities, Black, Hispanic.
Yeah, the
Did you?
community's
Did
wild,
you?
man. Like,
I mean, do you get hate from a lot of people from your own community?
here's the best way I can describe it. They hate that I have my shit together, which is something most of them struggle with saying confidently. And they are also the first to raise their hands to have me stand up and talk about things at a public arena because they can't do it themselves without getting upset and everything, right? So it's a love-hate relationship. They love that I can talk to people. They hate
Right.
my personal ideologies. And so I have to always play that balance of like who am I talking for right now, and where do I not want to compromise where I stand, which is a really tough thing because I'm on the city pride board and there's constant tear there.
Right, right, right. Because there's a local group that I'd really like to go to. There's a local pride group, and we live in a I mean, it's about 30,000 people. And I've always wanted to go, but I know that because it's a small town and people know, because I've been born and raised here, I have a business here, my husband's very well known here, that people know where I stand politically. And this is my fourth TikTok account. And the funny thing is, my TikToks are not even, I don't even feel that far conservative, right? Like, I just feel like I'm like speaking logically and common sense. And for people to hate me so much because of what I'm saying, I find really like it makes me I'm like mind blown because I'm not even saying anything that's extreme. So for to hate me and not want to have a conversation, but I want people in the gay community, the pride community, because it's called MC Pride is this group that I want to go to. They have like monthly meetings. I want people there to see that all walks of life support you, that we all can get along. But I'm afraid to go there because I'm afraid I'm going to get attacked for my me leaning right,
Mm-hmm.
which really
And
sucks. I mean, I'm confident where I can stand on my own 2 feet, but I also don't want to go into a lion's den, you know?
and that's been something it infuriates me, to be honest. So you and I could say the same sentence, except that I won't be hated. I still be hated, not hated as much as you, right?
Right,
And that's
right,
nonsense to me. That's absolutely nonsense. And so I've had a lot of people who absolutely love me on a one-on-one basis, right? I will say the things that are more right-leaning, and they'll be all about it until I say that I'm right-leaning. Then they'll be like, like, no, y'all don't understand. What you want in your heads is something
right,
that they also want. It's just it means you will lose some things, like your ability to walk around and treat people like shit because they don't like treat you the way you want, right?
right, right.
It's tough. Like I can say what makes sense, and they'll go, that makes sense, until I say I'm right leaning, and then they go, well, you're just a piece of shit human being. Like, oh,
Right, right,
okay.
right. Yeah, it's kind of like, so I just saw a video and I was going to do edit tomorrow where a gentleman was saying that we are, I'm not going to say it as well as he did, but basically, when you're not allowing people to have conversations just because they disagree with you, you actually become a nation of stupidity. When you only live in an echo chamber and you don't, and that's on both sides, right? You
Hmm.
don't allow people to have dissension and to have, and he goes, we are letting the weak people, the people get easily offended and easily hurt, rule the country. And that seems crazy to me because even when I was a Democrat, because I don't know how much you know about me, but I caucused for Hillary. Like I was a Democrat 4 years ago. So like, or probably now 5 years ago. And my eyes started to open when they picked Biden as their candidate. And I was like, wait a second, like he's a white old rich dude. I thought we were the voice of change, blah, blah, blah. So my eyes got open and I started to do my own research. But what I find really interesting is I'm not, I've never, even when I was a Democrat, I've always surrounded myself with people from all walks of life. And I don't mean just like, I mean, religious wise, economically, politically, gay, lesbian, straight. I thought life was more interesting when you had so many people to talk to and so many interesting conversations. And even though we disagreed, I was very inquisitive, like, why do you think like that? And we had, even though they knew I was a Democrat, the people far right were totally open to having a great discussion. And when we're not allowed to do that, I feel like that's a very scary place to be, which is where I think we are right now.
Yeah. That's one of the things that drove me out of Minnesota was that because Minnesota is, I mean, they're almost as blue as California. I mean, um, and that's what I started running into. Like my company refused to acknowledge diversity of thought, yet sit there and go through all of the diversity and inclusion things, and then as soon as I brought up the COVID thing, because I threw fits about the COVID thing. Like everyone in Minnesota was they went to heavy isolation. They took it to the extreme in Minnesota. I mean, there's people who, as of a month ago, left their house for the first time in 2 years, like into a public situation because they flew me up there for it. I'm just like, this is wild, y'all. But as soon as I started voicing things like self responsibility, they would just lose their absolute minds over it, and I couldn't be around that anymore. I can't. The one thing that triggers me, because I would say, for the most part, I didn't. Right in the middle, whatever. I'll support this side. I'll support this side. But then, once they started using manipulation, and I was raised by a narcissist. I also had a really dark past, and I am guilty of all kinds of things. I know manipulation. That is my jam and my trigger. And as soon as they started using that to have that conversation, and then I started paying attention and seeing the trauma triggers and the body responses and just the complete lack of association with like thinking through things, I was like, I can't, it's too much. I need to go literally anywhere away from here. And so now I'm in the South.
So do you think that people are like me, where they are starting to wake up, like, and that to the manipulation, specifically how like African Americans have been manipulated for years. I mean, all of a sudden, like all the BLM riots and stuff happened right the summer, right before we voted between Trump and Biden. Do you think more people are being awakened?
I think they're being awakened, but they're not willing to accept a reality that there is a lot in common with the people that they're told that they should hate, and
Yeah.
instead they're just like creating their own avenue of anti-capitalism victimization instead of just agreeing that no, we all do hate the politics and the politicians, but they're not willing to take that step down for a second and go, this is something we have in common. They'd rather just go, it's about anti-capitalism. It's like, no, that's misplaced. It's
Right.
completely
Right.
misplaced, and people
Right.
are waking up to that conversation. They just aren't willing to cave to what we have in common.
Right. Right. I always say like united we stand, divided we fall, and we don't. I don't. And I said this in a video a long time ago. I was like, I'm here from the future, and I'm here to tell you we will never always agree on everything. Like I don't know why. Is that a goal now that we're all going to have to agree and have the same exact point of view? Like the, I don't want that. I think it's interesting. Like your past is not my past. My opinions and my experiences have made me who I am, and so like I all my like for example, one of the reasons I thought I was a Democrat is because I'm pro-choice. Now, do I understand pro-life? 100%. I 100% understand it. But I have a specific experience that made me pro-choice, and that's my experience. That's something that happened to us, and so but I do as I get older, and I do see I do lean a little towards pro-life more than I ever have in the last year, especially honestly. I feel like the pro-choicers have pushed me further to pro-life just because some of their asinine arguments. Because I'm like, listen, I'm pro-choice, but let's just admit what it is. Let's just admit what it is, because it's a fetus when you don't want it. It's a baby when you want it. It's life on Mars when there's a molecule, but not life when it's in your stomach. Like I'm tired of my body, my choice for your body for abortion, but not when it was masks and vaccines. I'm just tired of all that stuff. Just admit what it is. It's an inconvenience for the most part. Now, don't get me wrong. I know there's rape and incest and for women that might be not beneficial to their health. Like it could endanger their life, certain pregnancies. But for the most part, most of the abortions happen because it's an inconvenience and they just don't want the baby. Let's just admit what it is. Can we just like,
I mean, that's my philosophy on anything with these moral driven conversations, right? Because we all have different morals and beliefs. I don't think the government should have a say in that whatsoever, right? Because too much giving them anything more than they already have is ridiculous. At the same time,
right,
if that's the route you're going to go, say it loud, say it proud, and be sure about it, right?
right,
And I challenge people on that. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to be this. Okay, Say it a different way. I would like you to just say it a different way. And that's usually what starts getting people to have the conversation at least differently, in a way that
Right.
they're listening to a different part of the a lot of people just repeat what they're told, and that's
Right.
fine. Just I want you to say that that's what you're doing.
Right. Right. Exactly. Like let's just and so two other things I wrote down that I want to make sure I talk with you about. One is your 6-part series because that's I was following you beforehand, but then when I started when I did a thing about I did a thing about John Hopkins 2 weeks ago and my video got taken down for violating it's the only video I've gotten taken down in this account for violating community guidelines, and it was about how John Hopkins had a thing on my Facebook that said reasons why you should get your kids vaccinated, and I said how about no? And they took that video down. I'm like, I don't even know why you would take that video down. It's I didn't hurt anybody's feelings. Well, I'm sure I hurt somebody's feelings, but um, and so that John Hopkins, I started to do a little bit of research, and then when that came out, I did the video about who they hired as their as an employee for the what was it sexual? Oh my gosh, what was it? It was that was a
The
professor.
sexual abuse things, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Center for Sexual, like Children's Sexual Abuse, and they hired of all people that person, and somebody tagged you in that video that I said you need. They said you need to watch their 6-part series. So it was so interesting. Like when you could delve down into the rabbit hole, which is listen, it was a lot more comfortable when I was a Democrat. I didn't go down all these rabbit holes, right? Like I didn't have this information, and it was a lot happier not having this information. But my question to you is, so what do we do? So we have this information.
When I started diving into that, because that I try to approach everything from understanding, right? So I lead a lot of support groups across LGBTQ, addiction, trauma recovery, abuse survivors, right? So I try really hard to look through a lens that isn't my own. And I understood the whole here's an expert in that field. And you need an expert to know how a bad guy thinks to catch a bad guy. I agree. I work in cybersecurity. I have to think like a hacker to be successful at my job. That part I don't even have that big of an issue with. What I have an issue with is just their ideology and their very proud ideology of we're going to soften this term, right? And the fact that out of the controversy that happened around that person was picked for that. And I'm like, come on now. There are so many other ex-convicts and ex-registered offenders that could be leading that position.
Right,
And they chose the
right.
controversial one that made the news. No, 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 ma'am. Like, and then that's what started leading me down into the, where the money comes from. It's always about money. So the question is, what do we do, right?
Great.
I had a lot of my followers who've liked me since the beginning, back when I was soft. If you go to my early videos, I was a lot softer than I am now. And they got really upset with me because they're like, what you're doing is you're tying a bunch of things together that are unrelated, and you're creating conspiracy theorists. And my struggle with that is from my own lived experiences is every moment in my life where I have caught a crooked politician, caught someone stealing, caught someone sleeping with the high school basketball team as the high school basketball coach. I have caught a lot of adults doing things over the years. And I caught them because I considered them, I didn't trust them. I have trust issues, right? Because of my own trauma. And I haven't been proven wrong yet. And I don't want to say it's a gut feeling that leads me here, but what it is I should question everything. I should question you at some point, right? I think it's perfectly fair
Right.
to question every single person across the planet. Now, is that for everybody? Hell nah. And that's where I think where the left is really struggling with a lot of these concepts is here's this dark, scary thing. And we're about inclusion. We're trying to just, make sure that it's a welcoming place for everybody. And they stop. I literally see them disassociate and have a trauma reaction to dark things. When I tell people about my childhood, I see them disassociate completely and they can't even process what I'm saying. And I think that that's part of where the struggle is with what do we do? You have a large chunk of the population that completely is unwilling to take in that reality because they haven't experienced it. They can't believe that that's a possibility. And I don't know
You
how
can't
you
believe
I don't know how you prove that to somebody. How do you prove to someone without making it actually happen? Because what's going to happen is this person's going to be in that position, and they're going to create a lot of guidance, And eventually there's going to be a lot of terminology and legal prosecutions around softening the language, and that's going to lead to lesser sentences and things like that. That's what's going to happen with this person in that position, which I am totally against lessening sentences for that nonsense. The darkest part about what I know about how people work is sometimes you just have to let shit fucking happen. It's hard truth.
Yeah, I think two things. One, I think people ask me often in my comments, like, okay, now we know this. What do we do? What do we do? And I'm like, well, using my voice is what I'm doing. Like, I have to use, that's where I got my power back in the middle of COVID. I was so pissed off about everything going on that I was like, all right, I'm going to use my voice because I can do that. I mean, I'm a middle-aged woman in the middle of America. What am I going to do? Right. Because my husband often says, because I'll get really upset about things and I want to save the world. And he's like, you got to dust in your own corners, meaning you got to do what's good for you and your family, make sure you're doing the right thing. And I'm like, I know, but I just sometimes don't feel like that's enough. But the other thing, like kind of what you said, when things have to kind of work themselves out or like things have to happen for something, sometimes, long story short, I opened up my own business because where I was not going well. And it was really awful. My mom said this to me. She goes, sometimes things have to get really bad before they're really good. And she was 100% right. And I think I've said this before in other videos, I think I'm in a way glad that the Republican, like Trump, and not that I'm a fan of Trump or not, but I'm glad he didn't win because I don't think all this stuff would have been brought to light and people would not have had all this information had he been president. Everything still would have been blamed on him, although it still is. But I think there's information coming out that wouldn't have if he had been president.
Yep. And that's totally a mindset thing, right? The panini itself, I had so much anger for it. As a result of the panini, I've seen hundreds of thousands of people wake up. So right. It's like, oh man, it wouldn't have happened otherwise, right?
Right, right. So it's part of it, yeah. You're glad that.
And I know that about addiction too. I've helped a lot of people through addiction. I myself struggled for a long time. You can't get there until you hit the bottom. And unfortunately, it requires hitting the bottom. Now, with this particular thing, this bottom is a really hard truth for a lot of people. A lot of hard truth for a lot of people.
Right.
I don't think it'll make things worse. I think once they start lessening sentences and people start speaking about that, then maybe people will look. But, that's too late, right? Things have already been put in motion.
Right.
It's a really tough thing to have to rely on showing people a failure before. It's a really tough thing to have to rely on showing people a failure before they realize it's a failure.
Well, isn't it kind of like, my kids are a little older than yours, but I can tell them all the things to do or not to do to avoid all sorts of life's tribulations, but until they actually go through it themselves, they don't really understand it.
Right. They don't see the value in that risk.
Exactly. It doesn't hit home. It doesn't make sense to them until they actually go through it themselves. One thing I want to talk about, this is totally off topic, but I want to talk to you about is the whole cis thing. So I am not easily, I don't really give a shit what people think about me. I mean, you want to call me cis, call me cis. I just think it's very hypocritical for people specifically using the word cis when it bothers people, but you get upset when people don't use your proper pronouns. When you say, I want this, I don't want to be called this, I want to be called that, but then you don't do the same thing respectfully to someone else. I know because you have a different life than I do. What is your perspective?
I went through a big journey with that all through TikTok, to be honest. I had videos where I was using that term, and I had an army of feminists come after me, but in a good way, because I stopped and paused for a second, because you're absolutely right. And they presented that logic just like you did. Like, how can you hold this standard, but then I struggle with the word, subjectuate us under our own label? And I didn't have an answer. And when I don't have an answer, I have to shut my mouth for a second. And so that's when I started having conversations with people. And, this is where the trans concept, and I become a very unpopular opinion very quick amongst the trans community, is like, okay, so if we're going to say that existing words and existing ideas are all social constructs, and that's the idea that you're using to go down this non-binary trans path, okay? It's the same thing for trans and non-binary. It's a social construct. What you're asking is someone to accept your social construct and to reject their own social construct that they've already lived their whole lives doing and that you've recently discovered about yourself. Like that doesn't make
Right.
sense to me, right? And I'm
Right.
also a
Right.
huge empathy for women who have survived abuse because of the stuff I went through in my life, right? So at the end of the day, where I landed was trans women, trans men versus men, and there's no shame on any part of that conversation. Trans people, where their big drive is they're so hella focused in being recognized as what they see in themselves. They're not enough. I don't want to say this generally because it's going to offend somebody, but a lot of them struggle with being enough for themselves because of trauma. I have not met a trans person who did not experience severe trauma growing up. And if you were to really think about, or at least this is where I landed, and this is from a lot of the work at the support groups, a lot of it is less about gender. The idea around gender is, stereotypes, right? So reinforcing gendered stereotypes is essentially what a lot of the charge behind why someone feels they need to transition genders. Um, I started thinking about it a little bit differently. Instead of gender, I just feel alienated in my body. And I sat in that for a long time based off of the trauma that I went through and the stuff and memories and all that. And then it became a lot more comfortable to say trans women versus women because it really isn't about gender. It's a male who's very feminine. It's a whatever that you want to draw there. And a lot of trans people can't get there. They can't get to that place of just being aware of themselves, being enough for themselves, that they need the external validation from people. And when I first started doing support groups, that was my motivation was, okay, trans people, I kind of see where the hiccup is. The hiccup is that you need everyone to affirm your stuff, whatever your stuff is. And the reality is they're not gonna. Like, not everybody. A lot of people will volunteer to do so. But, this smaller chunk of the population, you're so hell bent on forcing them, it's never gonna happen, ma'am. And so that's where a lot of my motivation was to help develop self-validation, love and all of that stuff. And they weren't having it in the support groups. Like, they would just get stuck in this victimization mindset. And eventually I tapered off from those groups because I didn't see a whole lot of purpose there. And so then I started having this conversation with the other side, like, okay, let's look at a trans person other than what the aggressive lens is right now, because there is a lot behind it, right? Like I said, a lot of them have trauma, and it's less about they want to take over something or take away from something, and it's more they're trying to heal wounds the wrong way. And I think that does
Mm.
deserve compassion from a lot of people. And I know for a fact that a lot of people start looking at trans people differently when you have that conversation with a lot of grace, right? Like, I won't correct anybody on pronouns at this point. I don't care. Um, I, it is what it is. People see me how they see me. I also present very in the middle.
But
But
don't you think it's because, and I think this is clear to me, and it's what separates you and a lot of other people like you, and the other. I don't want to say there's two different trans, but I do feel like there's people who are comfortable in they are confident, they're comfortable, they know who they are, so that stuff doesn't bother them. But because
mhm,
there's an other side that is not confident, does not have good self-esteem, so it bothers them when somebody does not even if they not mistakenly, apologetically misgender them. But even let's say they do it on purpose, let's say they're total assholes and they get so upset. And I'm like, listen, they don't have to accept you for you to exist. They don't have to accept everything about you and what you've done with your life and the decisions you've made and who you have sex with and who you identify as. They don't have to do that for you to be happy. And that is a huge, I did a video about that in my first account and it got taken down for bullying harassment. And I'm like,
mhm,
no, I'm trying to help you. Like how you said, you're trying to talk to people. Don't be the victim. If you are comfortable with who you are, that's enough. That's
right,
enough. And do not look for other people's validation. Listen, I am a straight white woman, and there's still people who fucking hate me. They hate me,
right,
and I'm okay with that because I don't care. I have enough. I don't want to say that I don't ever struggle with self-esteem or confidence, but I'm comfortable with who I am. Can I grow? Absolutely. Can I learn? But I don't depend on anybody else to make me feel good about me.
right. And that's exactly, like, you can be proud of your journey. I'm okay. So the one, I'm waiting to do a video on this because I don't know how to word it yet. But when I think trans rights, I think mental health support, and Because outside of that, we have what we need. Like I can go charge into whatever space I want and do whatever the hell I want, and I can say whatever the hell I want. That's a reality. Is it gonna be accepted with respect and people are gonna nod their heads in compliance? Hell no. But I can do it. Nothing legally
Right.
stops me. So from a trans rights perspective, that's where that is. Um, but I consider trans rights better mental health support because, to be honest, when you go to a therapist and you talk about gender affirming stuff, there is little roadblocks and resistance to go from here to the extreme. And that's a huge disservice for people because detransitioners specifically, which is a large percentage, they will tell you that in that moment they believed that that was accurate, and then they did the work on themselves, and now they have significantly different problems to solve for undoing what they did, right? And I
Oh
think
my
part
God,
of the
I want to do so bad, but I know that you could, right? And you'll still get hate, but you
yeah
could, and because I feel like the fact that the fact that there's people who have detransitioned and they want them to shut up, that bothers me. That's their story. They can talk
yep
about it. I think they transition now. Do I have no judgment if anybody wants to do it, if, again, and you might disagree with me, after you're 18. Do whatever the hell you want with your body after you're 18. I don't care.
yep
But if it's your body, it's your choice after, whatever. But I, I think that, how do I say, I don't want to, again, it's not that I'm going to piss anybody off, but I feel like if you don't fix what's going on mentally, then transitioning or not transitioning is not going to help you. It's almost like those people are on like The Biggest Loser and they lose 400 pounds. And then after the process is over with, they gain it all back because they didn't figure out what the problem was in the first place.
right.
And
They didn't do the work on themselves,
exactly, exactly. So once you
and what
transition, if you haven't figured all that out of what's going on in your head, it's not going to solve anything. You're still going to be in the same mental place you were at.
well and that's why I broke down the transgender conversation into four parts: emotional, social, physical, legal. And the emotional part is the most important one. Because if you don't have the emotional resilience to get through the day and be misgendered or whatever the case may be, the other three things aren't going to solve for that. Right? There's certain characteristics I cannot change about myself no matter what I do. My voice is my voice. Nothing can change it. I ain't getting no surgery cutting anything off. So, um, a lot of trans people go the other direction. They go, I'm going to do the physical, legal, and social, and then I'll work because I need those to work on the mental and emotional. And then that's not what happens. What ends up happening is through because hormones do mess. They mess with the way that a lot of information is processed. And I don't care what trans people get pissed at that conversation. We all know the truth. But think of it like a placebo effect. It's a false sense of happiness purely because you're getting what you want as opposed to it actually solving for a problem. I've had a lot of trans people, they get really emotionally invested into trying to get diagnosed with this one syndrome, and I always forget the name, it's really long, but it's where you basically have the wrong chromosomes. It affects 1% of the population in the world. And so many trans people invest all of their emotions into going and getting diagnosed with that, and very few of them do. And then they end up in this depression cycle, right? Because it's like, I don't know what's wrong with me, like I don't get it, da, 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 da. It's like, well, it's here and here,
Right.
and that's okay, but say it out loud. Like I say my stuff out loud, right? I felt alienated in my body because I was a monster. I was abused by men growing up, and I didn't want to be a man. That's it.
Right.
Like versus the conversation of I just know that I'm a woman inside and things like that. I can't. What does woman brain mean? What does feeling like a woman mean? And all of those are stereotypes. They 100% are. And so if
So,
they're go ahead.
well, I have two questions for you. So, do you think you would be where you're at as far as your trans journey? Would you have still been a man? I know you're biologically a man, and then you're a trans woman. Would you have done that without the trauma and without the narcissistic mother?
Everyone asks me that, and I don't know what I don't know, right? What I can tell you is that I had to work through being grateful for my journey, because had I not gone through what I gone through, I wouldn't have found what I found, right? So before transition, what I was working on. So let me step back a little, 1 second. So 5, 6 years ago now, coming up on 6 years, um, I excommunicated myself from my family. Like my narcissist mother, I was her everything. I ran her entire life, and she used me and abused me and all kinds of things, right? So I removed that element from my life, and I was broken, very broken. And then I sobered up about 6 months later. And through sobriety, I started having to face all of that stuff I was trying to suppress. The memories and the trauma and the pain and all of that. And I realized I realized what kind of person I was. And so I started stripping those layers away over the next couple years. And I had successfully done so. I had successfully stripped away a lot of toxic layers. And so I ended up finding this part of me that I didn't really understand. And then there was a situation where I ended up in a PTSD event where I flashed back to the first grade, the first time I had to sit in a closet while my mom was beaten, raped with me in the room. And that led me down a really complicated journey emotionally. And I started going, oh, okay, making those connections. Like, there's this part of me that I've been suppressing for all these years, and then I was kind of an asshole guy, and so clearly I'm going to tie this to this, and this part of me that's opposite of my outside external toxic layers is clearly feminine. And when you Google that stuff, that's what comes up, and so that's the path I went down. And then doing the work over the past couple years and realizing, it's not that I thought or believed I was one thing on the inside. It was just I didn't want to look in the mirror and see a man anymore. And nothing is wrong with any of that. And I am grateful for being able to say that. So as far as, had I not gone through that, would I not have gone through what I did through? I'm glad I did go through what I went through, because I would probably still be broken.
Sorry, my son just walked in my office.
It's okay.
No, you're fine. So, because my husband and I have talked about this. So another question I have is, and I'm just a very inquisitive person. And I think these conversations have to happen for us to understand each other better. Not just you and I, but everybody.
Yeah.
And I just have something said. Thank you for the most honest conversation that I've ever listened to. If only everyone would have these conversations, we would be better off. So I love that. I love that we're able to have this in a very safe, like, support you, like, I'm open, like, no judgment. So my question, so I have kids that are teenagers, and one thing that I've noticed, and I really want your perspective on this, is I feel like lately, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, there's a lot of biological girls who are very masculine, and instead of being lesbian, it's become such a thing to be trans that they're now men. When in my day, they just would have been a butch lesbian, and that's fine. But for some reason, they don't do that. That's not even a thing anymore. Butch lesbian. It is, you're now a guy. Yeah. It's a weird trend that I don't quite understand.
And I've had a lot of teachers reach out to me actually through TikTok over the past 8 months and tell me that 20-30% of classrooms are starting to fall into this, and I'm like, that's not possible. It is for someone to feel the type of complexities that I know what a trans person feels, not flippin' possible.
Right. So it's become a trend. It's literally a trend, which bothers me, because it takes away from the people that are true trans, that are like, it's hard for us to fight for people's rights and their lives when somebody's just doing it because it's the cool thing to do. Like, my son is in a lot of band and choir and theater, and he is in the minority because he's a straight white guy. He's the minority in the group, because it's cool to be bi, it's cool to be trans, and so people are choosing to be a label now.
Let's wrap your head around this for a second. Here's what I think it really is. And some people are going to be pissed. So I know that a lot of my issues were validation trauma. My mom didn't validate anything I did. Like, I was a function for her, right? I wasn't her kid. In fact, she treated me like a husband as early as 12 years old, and I was like hypersexualized and all these things. I wasn't validated as someone of value with her. Now, let's think about the age group of parents who are parents right now. They grew up in the 90s. Internet started coming out. Look at me generation. I think a lot of the drive here is lack of validation. I think it's people who are really desperate to, get the attention and nurturing things that they need. And if they grew up completely on technology and, you know, they have parents who are maybe a little bit too obsessed with technology or too obsessed with having their life in technology,
Yeah.
they're gonna go to these extremes to get that, but
Right.
under the ideology of these other things where it's like, ah, well, it's anti-conservative, so it's cool. Because that is a drive for a lot of people. That's where I think it is. I think, you know, the generation of parents who are parents right now are demonstrating behaviors that are leading towards need for attention.
Right. Right. I've actually talked about that because I felt like, one of the reasons I think a lot of kids I think a lot of kids who are in sport, it doesn't have to be just sports, but just activities, right? Whether it's theater or sports or extracurricular stuff, or they have a job, they have other places where they get validation of good job, well done, and they get attention. And a lot of the kids that I see that are being furries, and I hate when I see people on the left be like, furries isn't a thing. Kids aren't trying to be dogs and cats. And I'm like, yes, they are. It's happening even in our small town. So 100% it's happening. You just want to say it's not because it doesn't look great. But it's because a lot of these kids, I think, are looking for attention because they're not getting it anywhere else. They have no other avenue to get attention.
Well, and this conversation exploded when 2 years ago. What happened 2 years ago? Everyone got isolated. We got forced into the screens and forced into this completely antisocial crowd trauma event, right?
Right,
The
right,
trans kids conversation wasn't a thing 2 years ago.
right,
I mean, it was very minimal. But then,
right. It's happening, but not the amount that it's happening now.
well, and think about how parents reacted. You know, every adult on the planet reacted to the panini in a very specific way, right? Um, and I can tell you a lot of households who were more leaning into the fear for more than the couple months that it made sense to. Um, they were ignoring their kids, and their kids were online getting all this social media fed stuff and seeing people get attention for it, and it was a
Mhm, mhm.
self-perpetuated problem simply because people just forgot children existed and were part of this crowd trauma event.
Right, right, right. I so let's go back because you had said something earlier about Minnesota and the panini. For those of you who don't know what panini is, so um so I the first so when this whole thing happened, when the whole thing started, my husband and I and our kids were actually on a Disney cruise, and I had no idea. Like there was like whisperings of it before we left, and then every time we would dock, our internet would go back on, and I get texts from people being like, "Oh my God, you're going to be quarantined. Oh my God, are you okay?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And and then things started to close down. People were like, schools are closing down. And then we landed in Miami, and then we flew home. And my first thought, I'm not kidding you, it's laughable now, 2 years plus. I was like, oh no, Americans aren't going to do this. The Americans aren't going to put up with that shit. They're not going to be like, you can't close my business. They are going to fight back. And I got to tell you, that's probably the thing I was most disappointed in. Whether you are a conservative, Republican, libertarian, I don't care where you are on the political spectrum, I was disappointed in my fellow Americans. Now, my husband, I always thought it was bullshit. From the beginning, I'm like, these numbers, I was reading the factual numbers, and I'm like, something isn't making sense. This is not right. My husband, he will say, it took a lot of other people a lot more time, like even him. He's like, listen, people could only knew what they knew. He goes, I'll give them the first month or two. Okay, we're afraid, da, da, da. But after that, I am still gobsmacked we are where we're at. That people still, like Rhode Island, they're trying to pass a law where they're going to charge you more for taxes if you don't get this. I'm like, how are we still here? How as Americans? So where were you with your like the panini journey? Like
Oh man,
where were your what
having
was your mindset?
having mental breakdowns every 20 seconds. So I started transitioning in the December before the panini, and so I was early transition at that point, and I was terrified of passing because that's where I was in that part of that journey. And I also know I'm a very healthy. My family's very healthy. We are very health focused. The reason we are is one of our kids had a vaccine injury. Um, and that's something we've had to like really live with. And if we want to talk about parent guilt, you can chalk that up for later. But especially with the trans conversation. And so, I'm sitting in all of these places in these parking lots. Do I put on a mask to conform to people and make, or do I take off a mask and become like a target? Because in Minnesota, you were encouraged to be an asshole for anyone who didn't wear the mask, and the mask was the only indicator in the beginning, right? Like we weren't even talking about well, I mean, Governor Walz was talking about vaccinations, but
Yeah, Minnesota governor. I was so we are literally 45 minutes away from the Minnesota border, and I was so glad I was in Iowa because I was like, it was literally two different worlds crossing that border.
I, I've had to go up there 3 times since moving down here, and each time it's like this is why I left. Like it's bizarre, right? Because in Minnesota, like when the riots and everything was happening, they brought in the military. At that same time, Governor Walz was talking about like having child protective services get involved for people who weren't taking care of their kids per his orders. Like things were getting fucking wild, man. And that was the big reason we left. I'm like, I can't trust them not to pursue that. And
Right. Good
like
for
they,
you. Because a lot of people didn't have, because I kept saying, leave, leave. And they're like, that's not that easy to leave. And I get it's not that easy, but what's important to you? Like, how important is this for you? So good for you, because I know that's not easy to do.
yeah, and it was dropping. Like I still work in Minnesota, right? I just work remotely, and all of my social circles were there. Where I healed was there. Where I finally developed friends were there, and me and my ex really struggled with that in the sense of just like we're gonna drop everything we can because I'm a product of Child Protective Services getting involved in my life too, right? I'm like like I can't, right?
Right.
So in the early Panini, I mean it was who who do I get targeted by basically every time I went into a store? And I think a lot of the reason most of America catered to the idea in the beginning, because you said you were disappointed that so many people fell for it or caved or whatever. It was that fear of prosecution by
Yeah.
everybody. That's
Yeah.
100% what it was. Fear of
Yeah.
prosecution from customers if you're a business owner, prosecution from
Right.
neighbors if you're walking about. And like I said, my jam and my triggers are manipulation and fear specifically. And once I started seeing everybody had only fear in their eyes, and then I started seeing that the message behind what everyone was talking about was be afraid of this other human being if they don't wear this. That's where I was like, fuck this.
I've only had three times where somebody confronted me about not wearing one. And I was up in Minnesota, ironically, and it was the first time somebody confronted me. No, actually, it was the second. The first one was in my town. I was going to the grocery store and I didn't have one on. And a guy I had not seen in decades, one of my dad's old friends, said, I go, oh my gosh, Jay, I haven't seen you forever. How are you? And he goes, where's your mask? And I go, oh, and even though I have an opinions and I'm on TikTok, I'm not good on the fly. I'm always like, oh my God, what's happening? And I go, oh, actually, I had COVID a month ago. So I'm actually the most safe person for you to be around. And he just walked past me. And I was like, okay. And then in Minnesota, we were actually going to Florida because we were like, okay, let's go somewhere where they don't give a shit, right? It was the middle of winter. I'm like, let's go to Florida. And this was December of 2020, December of 2020. So we go to the Marriott because we are flying out the day after Christmas. So it's Christmas Day. My daughter and I at the Marriott right by the airport. We go into the elevator and it goes down and it opens up and we're not wearing a mask. And there's these two guys wearing a mask and we're like, and he goes, oh, we'll take the next one. And I'm like, okay. And then they kept pressing the button to not let the doors close because they were annoyed that we weren't wearing a mask. And then I was like, okay, what do I do here? Like, I don't have a mask on me, nor do I want to wear one. So my daughter and I were like, all right, we'll just walk out of the elevator. I don't, we're not going to sit here all night. So I walk out and he goes, wear your mask. And I was like, I go, oh, how about you not tell me what to do with my own life? And he goes, you're the reason why we're still in a pandemic. And I turned around and I go, no, you're the reason why we're still in a pandemic. And then I walked away.
Good on ya. Good on ya. Give them a reason. Yeah, when I went to Minnesota a month ago, because I was brought up there because everyone's returning to the office for the first time in 2 years. I've been there a few
Okay.
times, but most of my coworkers not so much. And it's a big company, 2,000 employees. and is a big deal. It's like practically a celebration event. And I was told when I go up there, I set up social hours, happy hours, lunches, meetings. I'm very social when I'm up there, so I started scheduling things, and HR warned me, and they're like, we need you to be less excited because not everyone is in the same place in their change curve. They call it the change curve as you are, and I'm like, and the change curve was where they are in their comfortability to be around risk and people. Which as soon as they said that, I just lost my shit. I'm like, oh my God. And so I said, well, here's what I was told the past 2 years. I was told to follow the policy, like it or leave. So I think at this point, if HR has a policy that we're supposed to be in there without masks, vaccines or not, I think those people should be told to like it or leave, just like I was told. But then I started advocating for them too. And I'm like, here's what you did wrong, company. Just like you didn't listen to me the entire time, you are now not listening to people who are genuinely traumatized because of the message you sent them, and you're forcing them into a risk situation. So you failed twice. And that's what got them to shut up and change their policy was I advocated for both sides using the same damn logic, and they're just like, well.
How dare you use logic? How
right?
dare you?
Like, let's remove the identity politics.
Yeah, I love it. Like we don't have to talk a lot, but going back about the abortion, I was like the my body, my choice. So I'm like, wait a second. Or like when they say that I'm deciding to do this because to get an abortion because it's what I need to do for my life, and I'm like, I just can't have a baby right now. I'm like, okay, well, what about the men? When you decide to have a baby, they had to pay child support. How about they say, well, I can't do this right now. It's not good for me to be. It's not a good time right now for me to be a father. Why can't they opt out? If you could opt out and have an abortion, why can't they opt out and not have child support? And don't get me wrong, I think men should pay child support, like when they should pay child support, but I just want to use their arguments against them. You can't have it both ways. It's your choice if you don't want it, but then the man has to pay if you want it.
Well, and I've done a few videos similar to this. I will use the extremes of both sides and point out the logic that they want to use for each other in the sense that, like, okay, so if you want this, you got to understand that this side is going to benefit from this, and you got to be okay with that, honey. And I do that with the extreme right and the extreme left, and they, that's where the triggers start coming down, and that's where they start, defending it in a very nuanced level. And it's like, no. Equality means that you're going to remove your personal benefit in order for you to get what you want and them, and that's what equality is. And they're just like, but I've done that with the trans conversation, bodily autonomy, right? Don't tell me what I can and can't do to my body, right? That was the thing a year ago for people who didn't want to get. Same thing with trans people. So, okay, so if you believe that government shouldn't tell me what I can and can't do to my body, as a trans person, that applies too.
So how
as
do you
adult,
feel about
as an adult?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. How do you feel about children? Now, there's two. To me, I feel like there's two different things. There's the hormone blockers, just the hormone blockers, and stop, and then there's the actual surgery. So how do you
Yep.
feel about kids under 18 doing that?
They shouldn't. And that goes to the parent guilt thing. So, one, hormones do impact the way our organs develop, and our organs aren't all of the organs aren't fully developed, particularly in the brain, until 24. So while yes, hormone blockers may allow someone to develop into a body that's into the gender they're trying to identify with, it also may significantly increase the possibility for neurodivergent traits later, along with other just things don't happen correctly. Surgeries, I mean, I know parents who are letting 11-year-olds get the surgeries, and the point I try to make with them, and it's not an easy point because it's touching mama bears, and I know better than to touch a mama bear, but it's a reality. The vaccine injury my kid went through is the example I use. We as new parents, we trusted the doctors, and we did what the 95% of the people around us did, and we did it, and there was an injury. And that injury was because we made those decisions, and we had to really live with that. And I think about that with parents and trans kids. Like, okay, you may look like the best friend, the supportive friend, the person is willing to do anything to make sure your child isn't depressed and wanting to harm themselves. and all of that is true. But what is also true is one day they may do that work, and they're going to have to work through the possibility that you didn't say no. And now there's irreversible things that happened. You know, a lot of parents will take trans women to sperm donors and freeze that stuff for a while, and that's one aspect of it, right? Like for me, I didn't want kids till I had kids, 100%. Then I had kids, and they literally changed my fucking life, right? That's how I think about it with these kids who are just like, I'm gonna go just start getting surgeries, and because hormones that trans women go through, it makes you infertile for the most part, which is why you have to go preserve sperm and stuff. But like all of these kids who haven't even lived their life yet, basically never going to potentially have that aha because a child changed their life, and they can adopt, absolutely, but it just hits different, And when I try to challenge parents around that parent guilt conversation, that's why I'm very specific in my wording when I say, listen, if that's the route you're going to go, then know that you have to take accountability for it all the way through. And that's good and bad. You can take the accountability for being the loving, amazing, supporting parent that you think you're being for them, but you also have to take the accountability when they potentially, at 25 years old, have a deep and passionate loathing for you because you let them ruin their lives because they were a kid and didn't know better.
Right, right. So how do you feel about trans women in sports? Like
Unfair.
specifically like unfair?
It's totally unfair. Like, I don't care how people twist that logic. Like, and I've been called by the left misogynistic for this. And I'll go, fine, that's fine. But I'm
How
like,
is that misogynistic?
Because I made a video where I said, well, I made a video where here's what I get called in my stuff. I'm a transphobic, ableist, racist, pick me, and I get called that probably like once a day. But I made a video where I said, listen, if I took this same biological woman of the same athleticism, right? So same height and muscle build, and I competed against them, I would beat them. And like that's just a reality, right? And a bunch of like left people or woke folk is what I'll call them. I have no idea what their politics are, but they're woke.
I would say I'm awake, not woke. I don't want to be woke. I'm awake, not woke.
Right.
Woke folk, I like that.
Never fell asleep. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, what an absolutely misogynistic view your misogyny's showing. I'm like, okay, so it's true then. Like, so we're not going to argue whether it's true or not. We're just going to say that I'm an asshole man for saying it. Okay?
Yeah. For speaking the truth. What an asshole for speaking the truth. Yeah, I find it, and I'm not going to be able to put this succinct or like perfect as I want to, but I've been wanting to do a video about this, but I knew I would get community guideline violations. What bothers me is again, once you're 18, if you want to transition to a man, woman, I don't. That doesn't bother me. What bothers me is somebody like what was her name that swam for Penn? Was it Leah?
Leah, yeah.
Yeah. What bothered me is that if you truly feel like you are a woman, don't you feel like what you're doing is being incredibly disrespectful to all those other women?
Right.
Like, doesn't that bother you? That you see how unfair? You have to see how unfair this is, and you're okay with it? To me, you're being completely disrespectful to other fellow women then.
Well, and that's where, that army of feminists who came after me, that's a lot of them are my friends now because I am very empathetic towards women who survive abuse, right? And that's exactly where my mind went too, was just like, they think I'm a monster because of like me impeding on their spaces. I've been accused of being a monster in the past. I was a monster. I don't want to be a monster. And I took that to heart, and I changed my viewpoints, and I sat in my own stuff for a while on it. And, a lot of trans women just, regardless of how the journey that landed them there, they still don't understand the concept of the womanhood part. They want it either out of admiration or jealousy or not wanting to be a man, but they don't understand it. And the reality is if a woman says that, hey, you biological male are basically just reinforcing patriarchy and all this other shit, guess what? You got to listen to that person. They've been dealing with it longer than I've decided that I have a woman brain or whatever logic you want to use there, right? Like that, that's a reality.
Right. No, I feel like uh, if you're going to make the decision to transition, there are some things you're just not going to be able to do. And one of them is, I mean, listen, transition all you want, but now you're not going to be collegiate sports or professional
Yep.
sports. Like, I don't think it's
Yep.
and that's okay. Why is that not okay? You want to have everything. You want to have absolutely have your cake and eat it too. And sometimes you simply can't. Like when I want children, I can't have my husband do it. I had to give up part of my career to have a child. I had to give that up. I made this decision and there are consequences for that decision. And there is, if you're going to fully transition, you cannot, not even fully. That Leah wasn't even fully transitioned. Like
Right.
there's just some things you're going to have to give up, and why can't you be respectful about that? What I find also interesting, and I've seen some other people do videos about this, is you rarely see a trans man take over any sport,
Yep.
right? Like what I found really interesting in the Olympics is there was a trans man, a trans woman who played on a soccer team, or well, the one that was weightlifting. But there was a literal person on was it China that said that they were a trans man, but they got to play on the girls' soccer team. And I'm like, wait. Then you should be on the man soccer team because you said you're a trans man. So I think it's interesting that the rules don't apply on both sides of the trans issue.
So yeah, I've addressed that a few times. That's it. Yeah. Yeah. Um, the reality
Again,
is that, well, okay. Let me do this in two parts. Let me do this in two parts.
okay, okay.
First part is I had someone post on one of my early videos that transgenderism is nothing but misogyny, internalized homophobia. And I could have
Transgenderism?
transgenderism is nothing but misogyny and internalized homophobia. And I,
Okay.
and I and I had to sit in that. I was like, I could have done
Look,
what anyone else does and
I
just been
like, by
like,
the way, I like when you said sit in it. I think more people need to sit in it. Somebody said that in my comment. More, that's what's happening right now. Because sometimes people just need to sit into things once in a while.
right, and accept that it's just going to be uncomfortable for a minute. Um,
Yes, yes.
I'm all about uncomfortable. I don't give a shit anymore. Um, another thing I gained from transition. But I could have reacted and said, "You transphobic piece of shit! Like I'm going to block you." I could have done that, but I sat there and I did a
Right.
video how I rationally go through, charging things, and then I was like really sitting there like, "Oh shit!" But what if it's true though? Like like because I know in my support groups, trans women are the only ones who showed up, and they were the most pissed. And I know how they talked,
Interesting.
and I know how they acted, and I know how men act, and I know how I was raised from a man perspective, and I know how those circles are. All of those things are true things. And so I sat in the misogynistic conversation for a while, and then the army of feminists who helped me through that journey helped me realize that the reason you hear from trans women more is because they do have programming as part of how we were raised, right? If you're raised 20 years as a man's whatever traditional upbringing is, you're going to have some misogynistic traits. Now, that's not the same thing as to say you're a patriarchy leader and misogynist. It's to say that there's certain traits, right? Privilege, if you will. I hate the word privilege, but that's what it is. And so, yeah, they're exercising that in a space where people have been trying to get away from that. I think people should accept that that's what it is.
Right.
Another thing that a trans man helped me understand was I asked him in one of the support groups. I'm like, "You're really quiet. Like, men aren't quiet. Why are you so quiet?" And he explained to me that a lot of women are raised to be quiet and compliant and things like that. And that's whenever I say this, it's always triggering in the comments. So I'm just relating what a trans man explained to me. And men are raised to be, let's take up as much space as possible and be very present in the room. And so that's another reason why you hear from one versus the other. Like trans men aren't as
Mhm.
loud because they were raised in that other direction, right? Um,
Interesting.
which is why people are pissed.
Right, right. Because I think a lot of people feel like, oh my God, we already feel like women had to fight for so much, and now these trans women who were born a man are coming into our, well, I don't know if the community, our, whatever, our, what's the word? And they're trying to take over again. We're like, wait a second, I know you identify as a woman, but you were a biological man, and now we're fighting for our rights with you again. Like, stop. Like, Yeah, right. So I feel like two things. I feel like there's not enough respect, but I don't, and but that's why I really like you. And there's some other people that are trans women that I follow that I think their voices need to be heard more. I actually think there's more people like you than the loud and ugly and the disrespectful ones. But
Yep.
we're only hearing that the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? I think there's way more logical, reasonable, respectful trans women than we give people credit for, and that's why your voice is so important.
That's exactly it. I have met a good range, and there are a lot of rational. I am a trans woman. I will never be a woman. Trans folk, um, but they are ostracized by the community. Uh, the one thing that'll set me off is allies. Because allies are all woke folk. But more specifically, that one, they don't have their skin in the game. And so when they come into a space and shut transitioners down and rational trans people down, they are hurting the entire community because they are putting a pedestal up on, what the social algorithm will push, which is the loud fucking people who need to sit down. And
Right.
it is a huge problem. I think more are standing up. I've had a lot reach out to me through TikTok, and they're like, "I wish I could say what you did, but I'm just so afraid of being attacked." And it's valid because,
100%.
like I said, I
100%.
get
I
I
get
get
that.
called it. Yeah, I get called a transphobic, racist, ableist pick me every day. I have the emotional resilience to deal with it. I've been called worse things my entire life, but a lot of trans people, they just want to walk the earth and just like deal with whatever's going on here, and they don't
Right.
want to take on that burden of standing up. And it sucks,
Right.
but it's
I mean, I hope you get these messages as well. I get a lot of messages, comments, and even in my comment section or private messages, just saying, thanks for using your voice. I can't because of where I live or where I work or my husband. I even got one on Facebook that said, I totally agree with you, but I can't put it on Facebook because of where my husband works. And I'm like, and so that's why I do it. I don't necessarily do it to change anybody's mind. I do it so other people realize, at least my perspective, because I have a different journey, but that you are not alone, that you are, because especially with COVID, people were in their little bubble, right? And they were like only seeing what was happening on the media, and they felt like the mainstream media is this because I don't feel this way, I don't see things this way. Is this what I'm supposed to? And so that's why I used my voice, is so people felt like they weren't alone.
mhm. That's my inspiration to do it. Is like, please join me in the conversation because I'm tired of being called a groomer. Like
Right.
that's a,
Okay. So yes, yes. Okay. This is what I'm talking about. So one of my best friends, we're actually going to Vegas with them in July. It's two men that are married, and I've known Brian for 20 years. And I said to him just recently, I said, "Do you feel like you need to?" I go, somebody who is in their 50s, and I fought, in the 80s and 90s for people to just be able to, gay men and women to be able to adopt, to be able to get married, like just to be treated like everyone else. And now, are you upset with this new community that wants special rules? They want to be treated special. They want special language. Does that make you angry? And he said, he was emceeing a fundraiser, and he got up there and he's really funny, and he goes, "Okay, LGBTQ, LMNOPQ, I can't even keep up with all the letters anymore." And he goes, "I laugh about it." He goes, "But I don't usually say anything because I don't know I don't know what to say. I don't want to get hated on. I have a lot of friends, and we have a great community, and I don't want to ruffle any feathers." And I'm like, the people that are like 40 and up that are in this community, they need to speak up, because me, even though I've always supported my friends that are gay, lesbian, trans, and bi, I can't speak up because they just think that I'm being like a transphobic or homophobic, which I clearly am not. But the people that are like upset, they need to use. I know there's more people, but they're afraid to speak up. Be like, stop doing this. Stop. You're ruining everything for us. People. Well, my fear for you, honestly, my fear for that community, the LGBTQ plus community, is that things are going to go. The pendulum is going to get so bent out of shape that they're going to start. You're going to start getting mistreated.
yep.
Things are going to be. I don't want to say taken away from you, but people are going to stop supporting you because they're so sick of the bullshit. That's my worry.
Yep. So that's, it's such a reality. So the number one comment I get on my videos when I state what a conservative would like to hear, I use that language specifically, is I was gonna scroll, but I'm glad I didn't. And that sounds great, and it really fucking does. But what that says is that you immediately thought and categorized me into this one thing because of a physical characteristic. And, you can't
Percent.
sit there and say,
Right.
hey, I'm not this type of person, but then you are. Okay, now I'm not
Mhm.
going to say you're this type of phobic. I'm going to say that you are dismissing people based off characteristics that you see. And I
Right.
get how it happened, right? The loud fucking
Right.
community went and overstepped their bounds. Um, for people who don't take that extra 5 seconds to pause, I get called a groomer, a pedo, a lot by far right people because they can't get past that first 5 seconds. And what's funny is, I I was groomed. I know what that word means. Y'all don't know what that means. That's a very specific type of behavior. And back in high school, I was starting to explore my gay tendencies, and it was public school, and the principal sat me down, put a Bible on the desk. I said it was public school, and said, "You're going to be a sexual predator if you don't stop flirting with boys." And having been molested and groomed and all these other things as a kid, I was being called the very thing that was my trauma, and it's happening again now on like the social media stuff, right?
Right.
And that's why a lot of LGBT
Interesting.
folk aren't talking. I, you know,
Right.
Imagine a 40-year-old or higher who already went through this bullshit and they got what they wanted. They got the marriage, they got the equality, they got the insurance
Right.
coverage.
Right.
But now, if they try to stand up, they're gonna have a whole bunch of people just immediately place them as a groomer or pedo because of how they look.
Right.
It's a two-way street, man.
And I love this conversation. Like you are like seriously, your perspective I really appreciate, honestly. It's just I have we could do this forever. I wrote down two things that I want to talk about before we go, but I still am reeling from what you just said because I hadn't even thought of that. I hadn't even thought about because you're right. Like I'm not angry at them for not speaking up. I do understand it. I understand why people like me who are straight don't speak up against like the politics and about the panini and COVID and all that stuff because they're afraid they're going to get attacked, right? Like I understand why people don't use their voice. I just I just wish that I could change. I wish we weren't in a climate where you would be attacked for speaking your opinion and your journey and your thoughts. I don't know how to change that besides being somebody like you and I, where we have these conversations, even though we may disagree on things. Like I wrote this down. Like, how do you feel? I just saw an article where there was a trans woman who was jailed in an all women's prison and sexually assaulted four women.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how did they think this was a good idea? And then, but then what do you do if somebody is obviously this person? I don't know if this person is a trans woman, if they're going to sexually assault four women. I don't know if they just did that to get to the jail, which are what people are afraid of. But what do you do with that then? Like, where should people go who are trans men and trans
Yep.
women for jails? Where should
My
they go for locker room?
Yep, my solution to that entire thing, and this is where trans people need to, if they would just accept this little bit of emotional resilience that they need to build, being a trans person is not a point of shame. All right, it is a reality, and people know what it fucking means. All of these spaces can have trans spaces. There can be
Mm,
a section of prisons that are for trans folk. There can be a locker room, bathroom, single occupancy bathrooms, special rights. Honestly, trans people do need special legal rights. Even they can't even really fully adapt into male and female rights in a lot of legal instances, right? All of those things are valid if they would just accept that truth and live in it.
that's the problem, though, right? They don't want to go to a room that maybe be just for like one stall or something that's for like unisex because I'm a man. I get to go to the men's locker room. Like they can't be like, listen, like for example, this just happened 2 weeks ago. My kids were at a choir and band competition, and they were changing between band and choir, and there was 70 men, and there was one person in their band that's a trans man, and he went in with them to get changed. I'm like, wait a second. There's 70 of these guys that are biological male, and this one person that is a biological female. Why is that okay for that one person to go in there with 70 other people? Why can't they have their own restroom? Why couldn't they have gone to the teacher's lounge? Like it's basically what you said. They can't. They want to be in the. They want to say, "I'm a man. I get to do everything a man does." And like you said, or I said this earlier, listen, you can make this choice, but there's things that happen that you may not be able to do when you make this choice.
Yep.
I'm sorry, you can't have everything, and that's okay. Why?
Yeah,
I think that's the flaw.
like I use single occupancy bathrooms, and honestly, they're more available than people realize. And when I'm out with my kids, that sucks. Like I have to search a lot harder. But I won't use women's bathrooms because I know that conversation. And there is a reality. No one wants to be in the man's bathrooms. Like that's a fucking truth, right? So,
You're nasty. Although a lot of public places are now having unisex, like if it's a
yep.
one stall instead of boys and girls, it's just whatever.
Yep,
I've,
and
I've
a
seen that a
lot
lot.
and a lot of people get upset about that, and I'm sitting here going, okay, so let's say the sign unisex was taken down and it was a single occupancy and all it said was private. If it said private bathroom instead of unisex bathroom, y'all wouldn't even fucking care. You'd be like, "Holy shit, I can take a shit in peace." But
I
no,
know.
because of the
My
word
own
unisex is
bathroom.
there, you get triggered, right? Like, calm down.
Right,
We all
right, right, right,
benefit from
right, right.
single occupancy bathrooms.
Right. All right, so I have one last thing I want to talk to you about because I want to do this again with you. So I don't want to talk about everything, which shit will come up, right? Um, so I thought when this whole thing, like we talked about before, when this whole thing happened, I was like, oh, Americans are not going to, going back to the panini and political climate. They're not going to take this. They're not going to do this because I don't want to just talk about trans because you're more than just a trans person, right? Is I thought, okay, what's going to be people's, and I don't want to say the left because there's people all over the place that are fear makes you do some crazy shit, right? It just does, and there are people that are not awake and don't understand what's happening. And I kept thinking, okay, what's going to happen for them to wake up, to actually see what's going on, what's going to happen? And I honestly thought, like, okay, when stuff happens with the kids, obviously it's when it's kids, they're going to be like, okay, no, now that you did the kids, and it's not. So like you see, like in the school boards, you're a terrorist if you speak up and you're not okay with things happening in schools. They were forcing children. At least they didn't do it in Iowa, but forcing kids to have this to go to school. I was like, okay, listen, whether you want your kid or not to get this, that the government was forcing a chemical into your child's body for them to go to public school. How I thought that would be the stopping point. Honestly, I thought they would be like, no, even though I want my kid to have this, I can't believe you're forcing. When it came to kids, I thought people would be like, okay, now we've had enough. And they haven't. Like, I've
Mm-hmm.
been so disappointed.
I relate to what's happening with the government and politicians to my expertise is narcissism. That's what it is. When you want to really wrap your head around a bad guy, wrap your head around how a narcissist abuses their victims. It's waves. It's waves of I'm going to give you this, I'm going to take it away, and then I'm going to punish you. And convenience is the method in which they're using, right? Conveniences. And in a world of convenience, it's a big tool to use. What they're going to constantly do is say, okay, so we're going to leverage conveniences to get you to, fall into our ideology. And as soon as you start thinking for yourself and going, this doesn't make sense for me to do, we're going to use fear tactics, right? So
Right.
what does it take for someone who's in a narcissist relationship to realize that that's what they're doing? It takes getting hit in front of somebody and someone else saying, you realize you just got hit, right? Like you realize this is bad for you, right? And the non-woke folk are doing that, but identity politics are getting in the way. Which
Yeah.
is why we need to be having these just real simple conversations with other side. I don't care how uncomfortable it is. What I've learned is a lot of people get inspired by my ability to talk to somebody without shaming them. We need people willing to do that. And it's going to show that identity politics is what's stopping a conversation for us seeing that we do want the same thing. Because you and I don't want our conveniences taken away, but one of us won't, and the other one will be reactive to it and only respond once it happens, and by then it's too late, right? It's inspiring people.
Right. Yeah, so I find it interesting. So, when I told you earlier about going to like the Pride group that I want to go to, there's a woman in town that is like, I don't know if she's eased off at all, but she was kind of out to get me there for a while, like called my husband a bigot, called me transphobic and homophobic. And the funny thing is, she's a preacher. She has her license, but she works out of her home. I'm not exactly sure what she does, but and I found it really interesting because She's never had a conversation with me. She went on all the Facebook pages that she's in control of and said that they need to cancel me, don't use me for business. I mean, just totally I tried to ruin me, kind of cancel me basically, right? And it's so interesting because her and I have never had a conversation, and I would love to have a conversation. I wouldn't do it just her and I because I don't want her to say she said, she
Yeah.
said, he said, that kind of stuff. But we need to have these conversations that might be uncomfortable, but also like what you had said. There's where did you talked about how people really enjoy how you're able to have a conversation with anybody and you're really understanding and listen. And just because this is the part that bothers me, just because I'm patient and I listen and we have a conversation doesn't mean I have to agree with you. We can have these respectful conversations, and that's okay if we don't agree. I feel like that's a lost art to have these conversations, and I don't, and I'm that's why I appreciate this conversation. But you and I almost think too much alike. I probably should have these conversations with people but I almost can't because it would, not me, but it would get so like heated. And plus they don't want to have the conversations, right? They don't want to be told what they're saying or doing is wrong. So I don't know how to have these conversations.
You ready for the next mind blow?
Oh God.
Do you know how addiction works? Like really how it works from the brain?
Mm.
So you do a behavior and your brain releases dopamine, and the more you do that behavior, the less dopamine is released, and so you seek that behavior more and more to get that same level of dopamine, and so it goes down a slippery slope. What is engaging on social media? It's reinforcing dopamine release, right? When you get validated in something you say, or when you see something you like, or you see other people you like, when you connect with someone online, dopamine release. When you get the opposite of that, your brain releases a chemical that your rationality system overrides itself to seek dopamine, and usually that comes out in a very reactive stance, right? So I'm going to get defensive because I feel in danger because my dopamine system is jacked up because I'm addicted to being right, being in my little screen where I can control everything, right? So on my screen, I can go like, I hate you, swipe. Now, when you start having a conversation with people, you can't do that, right? I can't swipe you out of my life because there's conflict. And people have become so used to chasing that dopamine trail that when they run into this, their body is literally overreacting from how an addict would react to having their drugs taken away.
Right. Right. Interesting. Yeah, there's something else you had said, and I wrote it down because I wanted you to complete your. When we talked about, like you said, identity politics and just that in general, I find what's really interesting, and it's just super cliche, but when Martin Luther King said, "Base a person on their not the color of their skin, but the content of their character," I feel like how you said, like some people judge you right away when they see you, and they're like, "Oh, I was going to scroll on." I feel like that's exactly what's happening. It's not just your color of your skin anymore, right? They're basing me as a woman or a white woman that I'm a white supremacist or a racist by looking at me. That's literally the opposite of what Martin Luther King said. You are literally basing your opinion off of exactly how a person presents themselves. That you have
Yeah.
and that's it. And it's hard for them to deviate from that. And it's so incredibly frustrating because I really don't care how you identify, who you have sex with, who you worship, if you believe in God or don't believe in God, or you're atheist or agnostic. If you're an asshole, then I don't want to hang out with you. If you're a jerk, it's literally, that's all it is. If you're disrespectful and you're an asshole, then we're done here, unless you could actually change, but it's so frustrating to see where we've gotten. I thought we'd be further, I'm older than you, and I thought we would be further than this because, like, I grew up in the '80s where everybody wished they had grown up in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't care. Like Boy George, there were men and women, men wearing makeup and dresses back then. They act like this is a new thing. Like, what's his name? The guy that's, oh my God, someone's gonna say he was in a boy band and he wore a dress to an award show, and I'm like, girl, we've been doing this since the '80s. Like, why do
Right.
you think all of a sudden this is a thing? Oh my God, look how crazy, look how monumental this is. I'm like, I thought we would be further because I thought we were further in the '80s than we are now.
Mm-hmm.
I
It's
It's,
because we have assigned value to labels, and we all evaluate them labels very differently. So the more labels someone has, the more value they perceive in themselves. But also,
yes,
it's
yes.
depreciation from the other side of the lens. The more labels I see in you, the more I'm going to depreciate your value. We have associated labels with value. So instead of
Okay, have
thinking
you done
about
a
who we
video on
are,
that? That's epic. Have you done a video
probably,
on that?
probably, I think so. Yeah. Back when I was soft, maybe I didn't say it hard enough. Um, but no, that's literally what it is. Is just it's all about value and depreciation based off of which labels you find value in. And the way I tell it to people, and I challenge woke folk on this. I'm like, listen, I'm not a what I am. I'm a who I am, and I think you need to really pause. That's one of the reasons.
Oh my gosh, yes. You don't have that's it. No, you slow down. That was a really good line. I am not, oh my gosh. I am not a what I am. I am a who I am. I love that.
And it's one of the reasons I cut my hair and everything. I wanted to show woke folk, like, listen, I will still get what I get with my long hair because it's about who I am that people are into, not all of the other shit that makes me dependent
Right.
on their validation. And
Right. Right. I love that. Yeah, because I went back to a few of your videos. I'm like, oh my God, yes, I followed you, but I didn't recognize you because you had long. When did you cut it off?
2 months ago, I think.
Okay, I didn't think it was that long ago. So how do you have, was it liberating? Do you love it?
I mean, I do miss having short hair because, I mean, just less maintenance in general. But I also miss having cool hairstyles. So I'm like really torn. And then gets that if they get.
Bullshit. I think that's a cool hairstyle. I think this is, are you telling me this is it? This is low maintenance. I mean,
I
long hair
mean,
can be low maintenance.
I liked a ponytail and a hat. What can I say? You know what I mean?
You can just, now you don't, you eliminated one of the steps. Now you can just wear a hat. You don't even have to put it
I
in a
mean, I
ponytail.
can, but then I don't get the whoosh whoosh in the back, and that's kind of the coolest part.
Oh, don't get me wrong. It's so funny you said that because I was walking in the store the other day, and just the way I was walking, my ponytails go like this, and I'm like, oh yeah, look at that. I
Right.
kind of felt like, yeah, I totally
It's
know
like
what you
it's like
mean.
having a waggy little tail, and it matches your bubbly walk when you do it. I mean, who doesn't want that? I don't get that no more.
Oh my God. So do you think you'll have long hair again?
I don't know because you get at that weird awkward stage where it's like, it's too long to look good, but it's not sure yet, and then it's a big
Yeah, yeah,
commitment.
yeah.
I don't know. It took me
No,
3 years to grow my hair as long as it did when I cut it. So,
and then you cut it all off.
yeah, no, yeah, I Britney Spears did
What,
almost.
was there regret?
No, I immediately was in love with
Oh,
it.
good.
Yeah, no, this
Um,
matches my personality a lot more, and it allows me to be a lot more free. That's the one thing that trans people really struggle, or where I struggle getting them to understand is like, the more you try to live in the stereotypes, the more dependent and harder it is to just kind of live your day, right? Because women,
Interesting.
when,
Yeah.
you can understand this, right? As a woman, there's just some days you do not want to. You just want to go to the store as you woke up and just like fuck it, right?
Yeah.
Well, when trans people have to spend so much time and energy into the passing and all of the extra steps, they'll
Right.
never get
Right.
that, and that adds a lot of stress and anxiety all the time, right? And so that was
Right.
part of me doing this hair is just like it's one less thing that I really have to care about. Like I'm not invested in it anymore.
Right, right,
So
right. But it goes along with how, because you're confident, right? A lot
mhm.
of people, like you said, a lot of trans women have to have those womanly things to make them feel more comfortable with their identity, where you're like, yeah, this is who I am. This is who I am. And I don't need to do that to feel comfortable in my own skin, which a lot of
Right.
people aren't there. There's people who aren't trans that don't feel comfortable in their own skin, you know?
Well, and that goes to the bigger conversation of body shaming in general, right? I'm all about body positivity because of my trans experience. And, there's a lot that trans people can add to these conversations, such as being enough for yourself and body positivity and fuck them, right? But that's not
Right.
what they're using their experience for. They're using it to overstep.
Oh my God, I looked back at my comments. Harry Styles, that's who I was trying to figure out, the guy that wore a dress. And they're right. Like, there were all rock bands, especially heavy metal, they wore makeup and they had big hair and hairspray. And they had like, and I don't mean makeup like Kiss. I mean, they actually wore eyeliner. Like, people, we were totally cool with that. I have to tell you, just because you talked about, so was it 2 nights ago? My sons had their choir concert, and it was one of my sons is a senior, and I don't really pay attention to a lot of some of this stuff because I've never he texted me 30 minutes before the choir concert and said, he goes, I didn't realize that senior parents go up on stage with their senior when they get recognized. And he goes, yeah, he goes, he must have known who I am because I can clean up. I can clean up, but I don't want to. And he said, remember, you have to go on stage to get a rose, so look decent. And I had, I had on a hoodie, a black hoodie that had Partyologic on it, and the back of it said, "I survived the winter of death." And then I had sweatpants on that had like crazy like southwestern design, like red and gray and blue. And I was like, I was gonna I would have walked up on that stage. If he had not texted me, I 100% would have walked up on stage. And so then I had to run and get in and do like I had to get in the shower. I had to like put makeup on. I had to scrunch my hair. I had to put on heels. I was like, fuck this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to look decent.
Right? Right?
I was so pissed. I was like, I just want to sit in the audience and just like, it sucks to be a woman sometimes. It bothers me. My husband, he literally takes a shower, combs his hair, and he's done. Like it. It always. I always get a shower before he does because I know it's going to take me longer, even though I'm low maintenance.
I mean, I'm just saying. I went from 35 minutes back to 7 minutes. You know.
Okay, I'm not short hair, but here's the problem. And again, I do not care if I get misgendered. When I have short hair and I don't wear makeup, I do look like a dude, and that doesn't like bother me. Like I remember I was pregnant with my oldest, and I had really short hair, and I was volunteering somewhere, and so I had this smock on, and this little kid goes, "Are you a boy or are you a girl?" And the mother was like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." And I got misgendered a lot when I was a kid because I had short hair, and I was like, "Oh no, it didn't bother me at all that I got misgendered." That's because and I can say this to people who are trans, when people get upset that they get misgendered. And I'm like, I got it. As a 27-year-old, I got misgendered, and it didn't bother me because I knew what I was. Like, okay, it's okay. I'm not offended at all. But I have I mean, I'm a woman, but like, I look like a dude a lot of the times if I have short hair. And I also have okay, I'm telling you something I don't usually have never said on TikTok. I'm going to look this way. I have this weird thing on my neck that my mom has it too, that I hate it. So like, I want to have my long hair to cover it. So see how it's like, there's like I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, a bump.
Like there's like a leg. Yeah, I hate it. And that's literally the only reason why I have long hair, so I can cover it. Because I love short, funky hairstyles. I think they're cool.
Yeah, the misgendering conversation. No, like you're absolutely right. Like a lot women get misgendered all the time. You know, if you just look how you woke up that day, it happens all the time, right? And trans women just like fucking lose their shit.
Right. Right. I wish I could show you a picture of my son. We were in New York in March, and my son got a beanie. And he's kind of got long hair, so his hair kind of did like this Justin Bieber thing. And my daughter goes, "You look like a lesbian." And he's like, "All right, like if somebody thinks I'm a woman, I don't really care." And maybe that's easy for us to say because we're straight, hetero, like, and I didn't transition. I'm not trans woman or man. I mean, what do you feel like? Like, it doesn't bother me if I get misgendered because is it easier for somebody who's biologically who they are? And that's why it doesn't bother us?
You know what it is? I'll tell you what it is and this leans into the patriarchy conversation, which I'm not all the way on board with, but there are aspects of it I can understand because of my experience. So let me tell you how my transition journey at work happened. I was in my job for a couple years. I'm a subject matter expert. I was able to sit in a room and literally just use my body language to get what I want. Like, that was a reality. Like, people would ask me what I think and I'd go, "Let's do it." And that was it. Then I transitioned, and then I had to like literally prove evolution was real to be heard. And that led me down a really complicated journey of understanding that I gave up male privilege, or straight male privilege, I should say. And as far as relating back to what you're talking about, the reason, women talk about it very differently than trans women do is y'all have been experiencing that type of shit your whole lives, and so you're desensitized to it. Trans women got knocked the fuck down the pole for the first time, and they don't know how to deal with that. I lived in anger for a long time over that, and because I didn't understand it. And I was talking to women who I worked with who have been in IT for a long time, and they would just say like, "Yeah, that's how men are." And then I was like sitting there thinking like, "Well, shit, I did that behavior." Right? Like I had to like have a lot of ownership there. And
Right.
that's why trans women get so much more upset about it versus someone who literally like you've dealt with that your whole life. Like you don't fucking care anymore. But trans women are going, "Shit, this is what the short end of the stick feels like? Fuck this."
Well, because I asked that because I was talking to a woman who's got two trans kids, which that's a whole other topic. But she said that the reason why I feel the way I do, and we were talking about something else, but she goes, "That's because you're hetero presenting," and I'm like, "Oh my god, seriously? Like, are we like?" I now you have special privilege if you're not hetero presenting. Like you get like I now have less of a say, or I don't get to feel the way I feel because I'm hetero presenting. I'm
I
like, oh my
cannot I
lord.
cannot stand the word privilege. I cannot fucking stand it.
My husband feels the same way. He's like, listen, there is privilege across the board in everything. Everybody
Right.
has privileges. There's short privilege, there's tall privilege, there's pretty privilege, there's rich privilege. My daughter has friends who are black that got their full ride scholarship in college that my daughter would never have gone being able to get to. There is privilege in everything. Everybody has some sort of privilege. He's like, knock it off with the privilege. Yeah, he hates it.
They're not privileges, they're characteristics with different hurdles. Like that's all it is. And here's a reality. Here's a hard truth, and trans people hate when I say this out loud. But I gave up straight male privilege, and what I gained was trans privilege. I can go in any space I want and say whatever the fuck I want, and no one will challenge me in woke country because I'm a marginalized person, and no one wants to be called transphobic. I
Right,
gained a
right.
privilege by giving up
Uh-huh.
a privilege. Like that's
Yes. Yes, isn't that interesting? Like I was thinking that today when I was coming back to my office to do this live with you. I thought you can say things that I can't say,
right,
and you will not. Now there you will get some hate, and you might get some videos taken down, but not to the amount that I would.
right.
It's really interesting.
Yep,
Wow.
and I challenge the HR narrative in Minnesota about this all the time, like because I'm like I'm starting to go. Listen, I know that y'all care. I'm in charge of the Pride group with work, and it's a big company, right? And I'm like, I get that y'all are about diversity, but what about diversity of thought and politics? Like, do we talk about that? And I use my trans privilege to challenge them and go, y'all treated conservatives like shit the past 2 years, and they're still not part of the conversation. So are you about diversity or are you about conditional inclusion? And
Right.
now I'm in leader and training development around diversity.
You know what's interesting about that? Okay, before we go, because my phone's like getting hot, whatever. But I do want to. There's some things that people wrote that I want to read to you because I think they're really neat. So I was in this meeting and there was a now there is like the group that I'm a part of. It's a national group. They hired somebody to come talk about diversity. But and I always say like what you said. I said you don't want diversity in thought. You say you want diversity, but you don't want diversity in thought. Anyway, he was speaking and I almost said something, but again I didn't want to get hated on. He was black and he was talking about how he's the only one in the room that looks like this. And I thought, is that all you see? There are people in this room I know that are gay. I know that there are married women in this room. Like, is that all? I know there's people in here that are handicapped. Like, is all you see for diversity is you're black and we're white? Like, it really pissed me off. I was like, there is a spectrum of diversity. And I was livid when I was seething in my seat. I wanted to say something so bad, but I was afraid to have that conversation because I'm a white woman. Like, who am I to say, listen, that is not diverse? Somebody who was gay, I wish they would have spoken and said, hey, like, there's a lot of other things that make somebody diverse, you know. But
Well,
anyway,
and
so I'm gonna go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, I'm gonna read my comments, but I want you to say what you're gonna say.
So the way I challenge the diversity conversation is diversity is all types, including the ones that you hate, right? So I've challenged in my work because we had to sit through like this book club about race, which I learned a lot, but at the same time, it was led improperly and it just turned into WWTs. Um, but I was like, part of this conversation with diversity is we should be including people who are racist. And their mouths drop. They're like, how could you say such a fucking thing? Because either they're going to learn or you're going to learn. But either way, someone's going to learn. And they're just like,
Have you ever thought about running for like higher office or something? We need more of you. Like,
it's a possibility.
okay, okay. So I want to read some of the comments because I think you really enjoy. So I don't want this live to end. I'm loving this conversation. Love this person's honesty and perspective, speaking all facts. Um, Hold on. We were talking about the 80s hair band and stuff like that. And our hair. Everyone wants a label these days. I'm human. That's my label. But going through it, so many people are like, I love this conversation. They are amazing. I love this honest conversation, that we need to have more of these conversations. And not just obviously you and I, but just conversations like this in our country, in our world. This needs to happen. Amazing explanation, good points. Yeah. So I just wanted you to know that I don't know if you have people commenting on yours, but I got people that just, oh, someone said, thank you. Never watched live and just discovered you, not me, you. And we need more conversations like this. So I've never been on a live this long before.
People, I'm telling you from my experience, people get inspired by diverse conversation. No matter where it lands.
Yeah.
Now, here's how I look at it. Okay, it requires vulnerability, and vulnerability. One, I have to be willing to be vulnerable, but I also have to be willing to provide a vulnerable space.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I completely understand. Yeah, and I have to be willing to admit that I'm wrong, and that's what I find interesting in a lot of my videos. People are like, "Thank you for." It's so brave of you or courageous of you to say that you were wrong. And I'm like, I don't feel that way. I don't feel brave or courageous. I've never had a problem. I've never had a problem saying, you know what, I was wrong. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry. I was wrong. And apparently that's not very common.
I mean, I was married 14 years. I'm used to wrong. It's okay. Like, practically my comfort zone.
My comfort zone is admitting I'm wrong. Well, this has been awesome. I love this. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much. Like I said, I was looking forward to it all day. I was like, I have so many questions. And now next time I want to do this again, but next time I'm going to like go delve, like I'm going to like binge watch all your videos and we're going to have even more. And I want you to have questions too and kind of topics. But this came organically anyway. Like we just talked for almost 2 hours and it was awesome.
This was super fun. We're gonna do more. We're going to.
This isn't goodbye. This is see you later.
Absolutely. All right, dear.
Yeah, so all you people watching that are upset that this is over with, we will do it again. And maybe next time I'll publicize it. Be like, okay, we're doing this live this time. I didn't do it tonight because I was afraid that maybe something would happen to your kids or my kids. But next time
I was thinking about that earlier. Is like we both could have put an event on or whatever, because that's what I do with a couple other creators. So yeah, next time.
Yep. Next time. Awesome. Well, thank you. Have an awesome weekend. It was awesome. I'll see you on TikTok.
Will do. Bye.
All right. Bye.